it's especially when partners or two owners are involved in it, there's always I was thinking you meant this. And the other one's like, no, I was thinking you meant this. And it's not necessarily something it's irreparable, but that's usually the source of where things start to get the toughest to keep the business going.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. Sitting down today with a good friend of mine, Mitch Zoll, talking a little bit about legal within business and small business entrepreneurship, all that sort of stuff. So, excited to jump into this, talk about some things we haven't talked about on this kind of podcast before. Mitch, thank you so much for being here. For those who have not met you, why don't you just give us just a super quick introduction, who you are, what you do, kind of a little bit of your background.
Sure. And thanks for having me. Great to have this conversation on recording as well as our conversation before. So I'm Mitch Zoll. I'm the founding attorney of the Zoll firm. I work with small and mid-sized businesses, kind of help guide them through the legal side of owning a business. My prior life, I was a consultant with Accenture, where I did strategy and business process redesign consulting. And so from that perspective, I learned how businesses operate and the things that they look at a process basis, how to try and help them overcome their business needs. And I've kind of converted that to using that the legal side of ways. I started my career, big firm litigation, did that for a while. And that's where I saw where businesses make mistakes. And so I started working from there to try and go upstream and figuring out how to help clients avoid those mistakes, either from formation, those kinds of issues, reviewing contracts, the big transactions, getting into the buying and sell, or just kind of putting content or information out there. Like a course I've got is just really guiding folks through the nuts and bolts, the block and tackle of how to actually run their business, kind of business advice from a lawyer.
Love that. It's one of the reasons I thought it'd be such so much fun to actually sit down and just kind of have this conversation. I know you and I had joked a few weeks back on where's the legal episode where you haven't had an attorney and like talk about different things like yeah, that's a really good point because it's such an important piece of this process of running a business. And I know that we've learned from experience in building our business that having an attorney that you know and you can reach out to, because more than likely at some point you're going to need it for different things. So I'm excited to just kind of dig into a few different things, and I'd love to just kind of start off with maybe not the biggest mistakes, but what's maybe the most common mistake that you see primarily with small businesses? So, we're thinking kind of our main street businesses, maybe the early entrepreneurs in their first few years of business. What do you happen to see as kind of the most common mistakes that some of these businesses are making today?
Yeah, I get that no one invites the lawyer to the party, but we're just, the first one's invited to the fire, but no one wants to talk to lawyers. I get that. But as the simple mistakes and simple things to fix are just treating it like a business. I think a lot of people get into this idea, and I see it online and I see people talking about it where it's, oh, don't worry, it's really easy to form a business. You just file a form with the Secretary of State. That's true. Like that's the $308. Everybody can do it, but that's the difference of like having a birth certificate and raising a child. Like it is really easy to do that step. Guarantee it. And if someone's selling you those forms, you're not getting the right step. But just sitting down and intentionally thinking about your business from the perspective of actually owning a business. The sales stuff is fun. That's really easy to find. The marketing, the HR, and the bringing people in. But there is just a core basis of just sit down and understand your business from a legal perspective.
Mm. So if we flip that over and kind of talk about biggest mistakes then. So if these are some of the more common ones, and maybe you can just like go back to an example or two that kind of springs to mind, but like some of the biggest mistakes that businesses have made that you've been across or had to kind of deal with. What are some of the scary horror stories of things that maybe have happened along the way?
Yeah, sorry, I'm fighting my microphone here. Yeah, the easiest thing, I was scrolling through Instagram or something and I saw this and I thought that's the way of saying it. If there's more than one person in the business, this is addressing that. The biggest killer of any type of relationship, I think it was meant on personal relationships, but the biggest killer of any relationship is unmet expectations. So
Mm.
I want this and I'm expecting this. I think the guy's example was something like, one spouse comes home, long day of work, just wants a lot of quiet. The other spouse is there, um, you know, in the house all day, just wants someone to talk to, or both spouses come home and say, we've both been through it, we're expecting the other, and they haven't communicated what they want out of that moment. Businesses is no different. I wish I could say that I've got this one example of where someone went sideways, but if my clients were to hear this, they're going to go, oh, that's me. Why is Mitch talking about me? And I tell them all the time, I'm sorry, you're not unique. It's especially when partners or two owners are involved in it, there's always the, I was thinking you meant this. And the other one's like, no, I was thinking you meant this. And it's not necessarily something it's irreparable, but that's usually the source of the where things start to get the toughest to keep the business going.
Hmm. I wish I knew the actual stat on it. So if you know it, awesome. If not, best guess. But when you look at a lot of the small businesses out there today that maybe haven't gone through this process, like I probably should talk to my attorney and do this the right way. What percentage of businesses out there are actually operating without some sort of actual written operating agreement?
Um, there's two numbers. The people who don't have the operating agreement, then the people who just downloaded the operating agreement off of the internet. I've had a client come to me and they said, we need your help, X, Y, and Z issue. I was like, great, give me your company agreement. And then just for level setting, if I go the opposite way, in Texas, our statute calls it a company agreement. Everybody else calls it operating agreement. They're all the same. But they sent me their agreement, and I started looking at it, try and figure out how to get out of this problem. And the one that they had downloaded still had the brackets for decisions. So the bracket manager or bracket member, they're like, yeah, here's our agreement. Like, y'all never read this. This is tough. So I think a lot more have that. LegalZoom sends you something, or Rocket Lawyer, or you can get Chat GPT to make you a company agreement. Is having no idea what's in it and never having read it and just putting it in the shelf. That's almost more dangerous because it's when you take it out is when there's a problem. And so you're like, hey, we never talked about this. That's when you realize, okay, we messed up here.
Ooh. So if I'm going through that process, I'm either started a business, maybe I just bought a business and I'm, asset sale. So I'm starting in my own entity anyway, kind of redoing some of these operating agreements. What are some of the staples that you feel every operating agreement really should have, or at least have discussed? What are those mainstays within an operating agreement for most small businesses out there?
So the power of the different parties. We have member managed, manager managed, who's doing what. I've seen operating agreements that have threshold matters like, hey, we both can choose to do this, but if it's then certain threshold amount, we got to come back to the table. One of the hardest and worst things is a 50-50 agreement. The number of examples that I can give when that's gone wrong. The easiest way for me to address that when people come to me and say, hey, no, there's two of us, we're great 50-50. We know we'll work together and agree when there's an issue. Great. First test, who will be 51? Oh, no, 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 we're going to agree. I was like, okay, you guys are at your absolute best. This is the cool times, the shiny new object, is the new business. Make this decision. And when they realize that they can't, that's when they start kind of going, oh, wait a minute. So having some sort of tiebreaker in process so the business can operate. Understanding how to get in and get out. How do you buy and sell? That's the decision you're making now for clarity when things are down the road and it's time to move on.
Hmm. Let's take the 50-50 piece because I think that's
It's a bad one.
probably something that comes up fairly frequently. At least I've seen it a number of times kind of in our business, and whether it's two different entities, it's two individuals, kind of how you look at, the 50-50 piece of it. Obviously one of them is choose who's going to have a slightly higher percentage, but if that's not the case, what are some alternate ways for tiebreakers that you've seen kind of put into operating agreements that have worked pretty well?
Tiebreakers are tough. I mean, I tell people if you're in 50-50, basically you're telling me I want the court to decide. Because if it's really getting in it, it's 50-50, it's called deadlocked. Um, the other time I've had a situation where it was a husband and wife went 50-50 and they were going back and forth and they were both basically going 50% I declare. And the other side, no, 50% I declare. So that makes it tough. Division of labor, division of responsibilities, who's going to be in charge of what. That helps at least start to narrow that down. Listen, you're the money guy. You get to make the decisions over X amount or under X amount. or I'm the idea guy. I get to make the decisions in this frame, right? So it's not a overall deadlock, but it's kind of situational tiebreakers where you can say I'm designed this to be this is my area of responsibility. And so that at least helps kind of carve it up. But it's really about that discussion, having that discussion, sitting down, like, what do we want out of this business when things are good? Because it goes back to that original thing, setting expectations.
Yeah. In our line of work, we focus on the definition of a successful business being a commercial profitable enterprise that works without you. In other words, it is a separate entity. It's an asset that you own. But I know that a lot of businesses or a lot of business owners that get into business for themselves, especially early on, if it's their first business, something like that, don't always put kind of that hat on of like, I'm building an asset that's different than me and my identity, right? So if we take this back to some of the operating agreements, is it fairly commonplace that these operating agreements already have kind of the distinction between here's my role as an owner and like here's the function that I play within the business as really an executive or an employee and separating those two? Does that tend to happen in the operating agreement? What's been your experience?
So the operating agreement can set the type of entity you file as member managed or managed manager managed in Texas. Manager managed separates those two hats. And everyone said, "Oh, no, 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 it's just us. We're okay." I was like, "No, no, no. Manager manage says sometimes I'm the CEO, sometimes I'm the shareholder." So that's the first step to designate, hey, we're going to be wearing different hats. It's like my example, if you're a shareholder of Dell, you get some of the ownership and your stock goes up and down, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're an employee. But a lot of times employees are shareholders.
Yeah.
So mentally separating those two roles, because sometimes the shareholders make the big decisions. Time to sell the company, time to sell the major assets. But the day to day can be the manager level, the executive, that you were in charge of this, go do these tasks.
Mm. Something that's it's almost hard to do when you haven't been into the business very long, or it's only you and a couple people at this particular point. But being able to separate that difference between me as the owner of the business and me as the CEO of the business, especially if you've got a partnership. Maybe my partner's got 51% or 52%, but I'm the CEO. What happens when I don't perform? Do
Yeah.
they have the ability to fire me, right? It doesn't mean I lose necessarily the business, but there is kind of that dynamic that oftentimes I've seen kind of in our experience hasn't always been thought through on the fact that there are differences because maybe one day you won't be the CEO. You want to just go off and own this thing that gives off passive income and somebody else is actually running the business. But today, both the owners or the couple owners in the business are still in the business doing different functions. Um, how often is that conversation kind of front and center at the beginning of a business? How do you navigate through that with some of your clients? Kind of give us kind of your top tips or ways to think about that.
There's a couple of decision points. The time I've seen it in the past, when both people are coming in, there's always one person's got the money, he's worth the most. The other person's got the idea, he's worth the most. Like in their minds, the business would not exist but for them, which both is true. And depending on who my client is, one will win. But it having those discussions initially, and then often what times what you'll see for that example is people are like, hey, I'm going to retire. I'm going to kind of start fading out, but I don't want to give up everything. Or even most, they are with the CEO and they have that float out. They're like, I just want to retire a little bit more. This was a side hobby. I invested in it. The first thing I try and do if I'm getting in the front of it before the things fall apart is tell my clients to have regular quarterly meetings. Set
Mm,
those decisions now. What are we looking for? And then the big annual meeting. What do we want out of this company? What are we looking for? What do we need? And then you measure that quarterly because where people go wrong the most of the time is I start a business and now the business is blowing up. And so the difference between those two events, things change. You were talking about in one of your podcasts, the constant reevaluation, the course correction. What are we doing here? It works on a project basis, but also on a business basis. And so if you have those quarterly meetings, you've kind of narrowed down the scope of when things went wrong. It's like, hey, last quarterly meeting, we said we need you here. You haven't been here. Well, it's the summer. Well, yeah, but we agreed you'd be here. And we can kind of keep that going. And then it shortens the cycle where things can go wrong.
mm. I really like that. It's a really I found from our experience, it's really important to have um, both leadership meetings and board level meetings. Now,
Hmm.
some businesses that may be the exact same group of people, because just small company, don't have full leadership and executive team outside the owners, the shareholders at this point, but it's different levels of decisions that kind of happen at each one. One's a little bit more day-to-day operational. The other one is, well, what major decisions need to be made for the longevity of the asset, and how's our CEO doing in the role, and things like that. I know 3, 4 years ago did not exist in our company. We did not do separate things like that, and that we've shifted over to this. We have leadership meetings every week, and we have board meetings at least once a month.
Yep.
And it's important to kind of go through that simply for some of those course correction discussions and different things like that. So um, I had
Yeah,
another thought that came to mind. I can't
it's
remember what it
well,
was.
yeah, it's the tough. I'm going to try and fix my microphone one more time here because it's fading on me like an undercaffeinated child. Okay, here we go. So yeah, and actually, it's important even if the people in the room are the same to actually have those physically distinct meetings. I think we were joking before about being in business with family, and all of a sudden you show up at Thanksgiving and you're talking about P&Ls. It's like, okay, let's separate those worlds. But at the same time, let's actually have a date. Hey, today, this Friday, end of quarter, we're going to discuss this and put it on an agenda, send the information out, frame the discussion so that people actually sit to talk about that. And then intentionally have a separate meeting where you're talking about something else, right? And so you come in with your mind frame set to do the work that you need to do that you agreed to do when you went in together as a business.
Hmm. So when we look at, we've got different, tranches of business owners, from those kind of in the early days, smaller business, to those kind of in the middle market, and then of course, large companies, things like that. Um, Do you see, operating agreements, things like that, massively changing as a company grows, or is it usually what's pretty solid at the beginning tends to be really what it needs to be long term? How does that evolution tend to take place as a business looks to scale and get a little bit larger, and do a little bit different than maybe they started the business as?
Your company agreement should be like your constitution. It sets the tone and tenor to the direction we're heading, so it shouldn't change that much. What you'll find is it changes when you add people or take people away. When you change major lines or divisions, you may change the way you value the company. If you have a buy sell agreement in there, hey, this is a totally different company than when we started. Let's reevaluate that. But it's still supposed to be your constitution. It's your quarterly meeting minutes, your annually meeting. Those times are the times that is granular. There's really time to go, hey, we're changing a lot. What do we want to do on our direction? But the company agreement is your constitution, so you don't want to change that too much.
So you said something there. You mentioned the buy sell.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about that. So for those that haven't heard that before, maybe heard the term, but really don't understand what it is or why it might be really important in the business, can you talk a little bit about what a buy sell agreement is?
It's really important part of your company agreement, especially you're starting out, and especially if there's just two of you. It's basically what do we do when it's time to move on? All businesses have a life cycle. It may be your generation or generations down the way, but all businesses will have this come up at some point. There are multiple different ways to calculate the value of a business, but there's ways to say, listen, if I went out or you went out, what do we do? What's our guiding principle of how we value the business and what we can do to get out of the business so that something survives if the person wants to stay? And so it's the structure that we say if someone wants to leave or if someone is divorced or dies, different ways we handle different situations to say if it's time for somebody to get out, what are the rules? And it's perfect to decide at the beginning because I'll tell you in the end, if it's 10 years later, everyone's like, oh, wait. And there's emotion involved in that moment.
Yeah.
I've had some clients who have had that in best of friends for 15 years. Everything was perfect. And then life changed for one of the parties. And he was like, I need to get out. And the remaining party said, okay, well, I'll make an offer and here's the number. And it felt offensive to the person who needed to get out because they had different things going on.
Yeah.
But the client looked back and said, hey, this is what we agreed to. And I'm just doing that. I'm not trying to take advantage of this. I'm literally just following our plan. And it actually helped repair and save their friendship going forward and help the business seamlessly transition.
Yeah. I had a mentor of mine. How did he phrase it? Basically, like if you're getting into business, you want to know how you're going to get divorced. Like
Hmm.
planning that all the way at the very beginning, and just really thinking about that because for those of you that are listening, we're all going to exit the business one way or another, right? Whether it's our choice or not, there's going to be some event that's going to take place that either says I'm ready to step away, or life is dictating that for me. Whether I'm around for what the end result of that actually is or not, right? So it is such an important component of how the business is set up. If the goal is to make sure that the business continues to survive and thrive and things like that, planning these things ahead of time is so important. Um, I want to talk a little bit about maybe entity type for a minute, and not necessarily from a taxation standpoint, but more of
Sure.
from kind of a legal sense. And if we're thinking of different types of businesses or different ways of growing the business, what would be kind of your guidance on a new business that's looking to kind of start? Do they look at partnership? Do they look at an LLC? Do they look at S corp? Do they look at C corp? Like what are some of the different reasons why someone may choose one entity structure over another outside of just the tax purposes?
So I'm always sure to talk with my clients that they are totally different discussions. I'm an entity setup, liability structure. It's a different issue with the CPA. I've had clients ask me like, "Hey, can you just fill this out?" Nope, because I'm not going to be defending it with the IRS. Um, First level setting the whole concept of S corp. I know that like slips in all the time, and I know we talked about this, but an S corp, although the name is the same, it's just your agreement with the IRS about how you're going to be treated. So I've had people say, "Oh no, I'm not an LLC. I'm an S corp." You're an LLC. We just made an S corp election, and it's about passing through. Talk to your CPA. Very important decision. Can be costing
Yep.
you thousands. So going back to the kind of root question, there's a sole proprietorship is just, Joe the shoe builder, right? I'm just me. I don't need to worry about anything else. You might have a DBA or something. That's just the basic form. And then, did you ever read Choose Your Own Adventure books growing up,
Hmm.
where you get through a chapter and then you can say you can go this way or this way? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I always cheated. I always looked to see, and then I'd make my choice. And I'm a lawyer now, cheating with the company agreements. An LLC is a Choose Your Own Adventure book. You can put in a lot of things. You can carve out a lot of things that are in the statute. If you don't have a company agreement, you are making decision because the statute's making it for you, and it's not necessarily making the decision you want. But an LLC is that hybrid of choose your own adventure. You can set up the fiduciary duties, the responsibilities, the roles. And that's why like 89% of entities in Texas are set up as LLCs. You can get the benefits of taxation and things of a partnership or avoid them through an LLC. You get the structure and protection of a C Corp. This is the Inc. that you're familiar with. But you can still go through and choose your own adventure and understand what you want to have in your rules through an LLC. A C Corp, when people set those up, they don't realize that a C Corp has a lot of statutory structure of what you need to do, like your annual meeting. It's best to do it if you're an LLC. But if you don't, the C Corp is expected to have those, and there's structure and there's requirements. That's why investors theoretically like them because you're supposed to be doing these things. But that's why small businesses probably shouldn't start doing it because you're not doing these things. And if you're looking for that big VC hit money, you can switch to a C Corp at that time. So C Corp is sort of like the bigger entities, the Incs, because they've got more structure and formality. Partnerships has got some fiduciary duties issues and some relationship things, but slotted right in that major middle, the 89%, is an LLC. I see online people like, oh, no, single member LLC. It just doesn't exist. It exists in Texas. It's supported in Texas. I've got my entities as single member LLCs. It works fine as long as you do it correctly. But if you're a one member, if you're 100 members, LLC usually fits the bill for a lot of things, but there are unique situations for each one, not legal advice, all the words I need to say.
So what would be outside of looking to maybe take on some VC partners or something else like that? What would be some of the other reasons why someone would choose to move from an LLC to a C corp? Because I've had some of those questions in the past, and it's always fun, especially when they're newer to business and have, kind of talking through that there's some different things, as you mentioned, that are required and expected from those in a C Corp versus some of the other entity types. But why why would somebody choose to go that direction? Is it when they start to get to a certain size, if they're looking at a particular way to exit the business? What tends to be kind of the catalyst for that change?
There are a lot of tax questions that kind of feed into that, so that might be part of it. There are also people who do the rollover 401k investing in it. That is a whole
Mm,
subset of folks that do C corps because they're creating shares so they can invest their 401ks. I will tell you, I had someone call me actually about it recently. Someone asked me about it in 2008, I think, and I said, I don't know, man. This looks like it's kind of threading a needle. I don't know if it's going to hold, what the IRS is going to do because globally it's a sort of like taking stock out of your 401k to put it into a stock that's your business, and there's companies who set them up. I kind of shrugged my shoulders at them back then, and they're still going strong now. So it's something I won't touch because it deals with securities, but there are reasons for doing a C corp for that. There are tax reasons for it. The entities that I've worked with, on the grand majority of it, it has not been a necessity or reason. I think sometimes people get that, oh, we're going to go big, so why not do it now? And it hasn't always been the best decision for the clients that I've worked with. But other than some tax basis and some structure issues that are more CPA driven, it's a really unique subset of folks who go C Corp.
mm, that's interesting. A lot of the tax things, yes, for those that are listening, if you don't have a good CPA that can take you through a lot of those, make sure that you reach out to one. I always joke that it's great to have an attorney, a CPA, a business coach, a banker. Like you want to have all these folks like in your back pocket. It's part of your team as you build a business. So Mitch, as we kind of start to maybe kind of wrap up our conversation today, I'm gonna hopefully this question won't stump you, but if you had to like kind of distill down maybe the top three tips that you would give business owners today from a legal perspective, um, what would be the top three tips that you'd want them to walk away with today?
Um, First one, read your contracts. I think I try and tell folks, people misunderstand the purpose of a contract. The way people look at contracts is like the first exhibit in litigation, right? Oh, it's ironclad. No, if you're looking at it like just a future fight, you're missing the point because that's not a fun world to be in. I started litigation. Come back and read your contracts and say, do we actually do this? And is this what we actually want to do? It should be, I call it like a roadmap for communication. Easiest thing, take a red pen right now and paragraph by paragraph, act like your 12th grade English teacher and beat up your own contract to say, is this really what we meant? Free legal advice because there's no lawyer involved. Actually ask yourself, is this what we need to do? And then ask yourself or your team, does this account for the situations where we've come in and had a problem? Does it address refunds if someone all of a sudden wants a refund? I had a coach who said that, I'm asking for information. They're not giving me anything. Is there an abandonment clause? So, first tip off the bat, read your contracts before you even call a lawyer so you understand what's in there. Second tip, of course, if you're working with other people, at any one plus one, have that conversation to understand your expectations. Really understand where are we going from here and what do we need to do from here. Um, do we both agree with where things are going and what's happening next? And the third one is just kind of clean up your structure, clean up your files. I was talking with somebody a minute ago. We're talking about the LA fires and things that come up, the great events, even lockout from COVID, right? You've had your fair warnings. You've been given advice. There may be a time with either it's gone or it's locked out. You can't get access to your stuff. It's so much easier if you're planned for that moment. Just organize yourself, get yourself digitized, know where things are so that your business can continue on if something happens.
Mm. Well, folks, you heard it here. There's your three tips. Please make sure you go and actually do something with them. And if you have additional questions, things like that, Mitch, where can the audience find you for more information to just get your take on a couple different things, potentially work with you down the road? Where can they go for a little bit more information and learn more about you?
Yeah, I realized I messed up that my 3 tips didn't involve call a lawyer. So tip number 4 is hire a lawyer. God, bad marketing. That was a bad idea. No, Zoll Firm, ZOLLFIRM. Reach me there. I'm in the process of building out a newsletter. I will not like blow people's inbox up, but one of the first things I'll do is offer a free file structure that lets you put all your folders and your files and all the important documents from where does our lease go and where does our insurance go. So find me at zollfirm.com, and that'll be an easy way to sign up for more information. Follow me on LinkedIn. And tip number 4 is now tip number 1: hire a good lawyer.
Beautiful. I love it. For those that are listening, that have been following the business side, you're continuing to grow your business, things like that. I just want to make one additional note on the organizing your files and things like that. The more you do that now, when you do come to the point of wanting to exit your business and actually need to work with a business broker and pull all your stuff together, having that organized ahead of time saves a ton of work. Investors are going to want to see it. The next buyer of your business is going to want to see a lot of that stuff. So just some preemptive stuff to go there. So I love that particular tip as it relates to a lot of different things within the business. So, Mitch, this has been a lot of fun. I know we could probably sit here and talk, legal stuff for another 2 hours, but
Says
appreciate
no
the
one but lawyers. So I appreciate you
right.
saying that there. Yeah.
So no, this has been a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of good wisdom and nuggets here. As always, for those that are listening, take some sort of action from this conversation today. If you took one thing, that's all. Take one thing from the conversation, implement it into your business, implement it into kind of your life, and continue to just move things forward one step at a time. So, Mitch, thanks so much for being here.
Great to talk to you. Thanks, Tanner.